All right, thank you so much and welcome to our digital dialogue. My name is Dr. Brian Ruben, the Executive Chairman of the Assistant Council, and our focus is on really repositioning for Trump 2.0. We want to explore the global impact of President Donald Trump's policies. And I'm being joined today by Professor Rob Gisbergs. He is a professor of global strategy and global business law at the Core International Business Schools. I hope I got the name right. If I didn't, please forgive me and let us know how to pronounce it better. But it's good to have you, Rob. And we also have Dr. Anders Edwardson, who is, of course, the author of Radical Betrayal: How Liberals and New Conservatives Are Wrecking America's Exceptionalism. It's so great to have you join, Anders.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. And we're going to be getting right into it. I mean, Donald Trump has taken office as the 47th president of the United States in what many describe as the greatest political comeback in history of the United States and maybe globally, actually. Opinion is divided. But he's now taking office and he didn't waste any moment from the very first day in executing his strategy with a flurry of executive actions covering issues from tariffs to pardons and a whole lot of issues. It's been very, 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 very an amazing period of his presidency. So we want to look at these policies in terms of their global impact and how they can actually make a meaning. Of course, many have argued that some of these policies are dangerous and could mark the decline of America as a global superpower. Some others argue that this could be an opportunity for America's golden age to return. And of course, America remains a very important country on earth, given the size of the economy, population, and their position in global affairs. So we're going to be looking at all of these issues right now and helping our listeners from across the world and US understand the implications of this and what this can mean for the world. So I'd like to begin by asking a very simple question, and I'll come to you first of all, Anders. How do you see President Trump's immigration policies influencing economic development in poorer nations especially?
Yeah, I mean, he has made clear that immigration, or rather stopping illegal immigration, will be probably next to get the economy going, will be the most important field of operation for him and his administration, at least in the first year or two, until things may be settled down. And I mean, like everything, I think it's more of a cultural shock than I think everyone except maybe really staunch open border ideologues realize after the last 4 years that something had to be done. The amount of people coming in over the border was. You don't need to be xenophobic or anything. You just need to be an economist to see that the American society can't swallow this much people in such a short time. So everyone knew that something needed to be done, and I'm sure everyone knew that Trump would do harsher stuff than, say, Kamala Harris would have done. So I think it's mostly a cultural shock now, the first weeks and months. I think the world will get used to this as the situation calms down and you get it under control. So I see big opportunities for other countries to look at this and learn from both failures and successes. And I don't really see any big political or structural or global risks with this new harder line, more than medial, that it will create a lot of bad media for But no, I see mostly opportunities actually.
Hmm. I see that. That's interesting. Okay, so let's get your thoughts on this, Professor Rob.
Okay, so I think there's a number of ways to look at this, and Anders certainly took an interesting perspective that's very helpful for us. My one way that I'm thinking about it is that for years in the United States, we've had this argument on both sides of the immigration debate, and one of the arguments that has resonated over the years with Americans in different parts of the country is this idea that when anti-immigration people argue against open borders, they often say that um, illegal aliens are taking jobs away from American citizens, and the argument on the other side of the equation is that though many of the jobs that they may be taking are not super desirable jobs. They're jobs that many other people don't want. So that's been the tenor of the debate, and so I think we will have an opportunity over the next several months to see how that debate actually plays out, because we will be seeing a reduction in employees in the restaurant sector and in other areas where uh, folks who are coming from Mexico and other parts of Latin America, um, they're taking on these jobs. So I think it'll on a domestic level, we'll be able to really see which side of this argument is more robust and resonates more. As far as the implications for the global economy, I don't see this having a huge impact on the global economy. I think it might have an impact on the U.S. Economy in the short term, but as Anders said, in the medium and long term, I think that the United States will adjust, and any type of ripple effect on the global economy will be minimal. I think the best way to look at it is um, how is the fact that there's going to be closed borders and there's going to be more deportation. And I think the best way to look at the implications for the global economy is really not to look at how it's going to affect the U.S. economy, but I think more how is it going to affect the economy of the countries from which these individuals are trying to flee, and how will it affect those countries' economies, and thus indirectly have an effect on the global economy. That's my take on how the immigration policy connects to the global economy.
Oh yeah, that's quite interesting. So, given what you've said, do you think that restructuring immigration could actually encourage people to invest in their home country, especially in developing countries? Or do you think it will create new challenges for developing economies? So, what I'm looking at, are there historical evidences that policies like this can influence and encourage investment flow in some of these countries where there has to now be deportations? So when you see there are opportunities to travel to the United States or Canada or wherever it is, it's reducing. That opportunity isn't as much as it used to be. Do you think that will encourage investment in developing countries?
So I don't think it'll have a sizable impact on investment flows in other countries, because investment flows are largely driven by successful businessmen and women who have background and experience with foreign direct investment and how to adapt to different cultures, and many of those investment decisions come from people who are fairly wealthy, and I don't think that those people will be significantly affected, or how they make decisions will be significantly affected by the immigration policy. I think that Trump 2.0, as far in another context, will have a significant ripple effect on the global economy when we talk about protectionist measures, the tariffs. Now, his economic policies, that's a different story. But as far as the immigration policies and the countries from which people are trying to enter the U.S., I don't see it having a sizable impact on the investment flows.
Oh, that's interesting. So, Anders, I'll come to you. Are there historical facts to support the idea that restructuring immigration can either have a positive or negative impact in countries where people are being deported?
No, as already been said, I think immigration politics and investment flows. Now, I'm not an economist, I'm a historian and political scientist, but I don't see any real important connection there. We had, in a few days into Trump's first week, it was a short debate about so-called H-1B visas, which is like skilled worker visas. And there are also some other subcategories of visas there. And there was a more hardcore people, Steve Bannon and stuff, who wanted to stop that inflow from H-1B and other skilled worker things also. But as I understand it, that was a debate that came and went, and the H-1B system will be there. It means that people with high skills can move to the US and work in the IT sector and stuff like that. So I don't see anything so far that I would say will affect investment flows either way, either in or out of the US or to and from Africa or Asia or South America. There may be some slighter shifts in the really long term, but I can't really see how they could be connected to getting the southern border under control. No.
I was citing an instance in 1965, especially with the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965. When that happened, countries in Latin America and Asia began to prioritize local development and looked inward for economic solution. And also the economic boom in South Korea, which invested heavily in infrastructure and technology during the 1970s and 1980s, was also partly fueled by the reduction of reliance on immigration. Don't you think that could also, we could see such a situation with the current immigration policies?
So you're saying in 1965, investment in infrastructure in the United States increased, or in the other countries?
No, especially in countries in Latin America, because you see that was the period of the 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act. When that happens, most countries in Latin America began to look inwards for economic development because the opportunity to go to America reduced significantly. It was also this period that the heavy investment in infrastructure in South Korea began to happen between the 1970s and 1980s. All of that were mainly in response to the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965. So don't you see a similar thing happening with the current immigration policies?
I think that it's country specific. If we're looking at overall impact on the global economy, I'm not convinced that there's going to be a significant effect. Now, if we look at countries like Mexico and other countries where from where folks have been trying to enter into the U.S. will no longer be able to, I think there certainly could be a marginal effect on overall local spending on economic development. But when we talk about the idea of foreign investment flows, I don't see a sizable impact on that. I think another concept that's relevant from a geopolitical perspective is this idea about the populist or more nationalist sentiment that we see spreading in certain parts of the world, including Latin America. I think that if we want to look at the impact on investment flows of a Trump 2.0, the immigration policy certainly can have an effect like it did in 1965. I think we can look in Mexico and maybe in one or two other Latin American countries, there may be somewhat of a change. But I think when you consider geopolitically how we have a nationalist ideology and protectionist measures going up, and you look at the fact that people who are many of the people who are coming from other countries to the United States are not making investment decisions and aren't really driving the politics of the countries from which they come. I don't see a repeat of 1965 based on those two things, but it's certainly possible that in one or two countries there's a small change, but I don't see one that's a glaring change.
Okay, that's interesting. That your point is well noted. I'll come to you, Anders, and I would like to get your thoughts. What do you think about Trump's border policies? Do you see this playing a role in really reducing crime, particularly transnational criminal networks and human trafficking?
If I can start there, there you will see a more significant effect, I think, because getting the U.S.-Mexico border, if not closed, so under control, will partly be a good thing to fight trafficking, especially. The problem with here is geography, because as I understand it, the biggest trafficking flow comes through the Caribbean to Florida, where I live, and stuff like this. So, but of course, getting the southern border under control, it will partly stop the flow. The risk is probably, though, that it just will, where if it decreases over the land border, it will just increase further through boats and stuff through the Caribbean. But that's the thing. Generally, the only thing I can say, I think increased border control will make it harder for traffickers, drug runners, and everyone to just use the literal loopholes that exist up until today.
Okay, that's beautiful. So we can see a reduction in criminal activities. That's something that's
if I may add there I think the deportation policy specifically is much more important for the U.S. and some countries than the immigration policies per se. We had an incident just the other day when Colombia, for a few hours before they backed down, refused to take back what was it, 2 plane loads of illegal immigrants that, as I understand it, if not all of them were heavy criminal. And of course, if countries get their criminals back, so to speak, in higher numbers, that will of course negatively affect those countries, but it will be a positive effect in the U.S.
Oh, that's interesting. Now, you mentioned Colombia. I would like to come to Europe. Do you think the approach could have been better? I mean, considering the fact that Colombia is also a major trading partner of the United States, do you think that the approach to deporting those do you think would have been done differently? And what do you think about the response of
Okay.
the president?
Yeah,
Do you
no, sir. I think that, you know, we have a free trade agreement with Colombia. We have a lot of mutual dependency from an economic perspective with Colombia. I'm a professor at a university, and we have many students coming here to I'm in Boston from Colombia, and certainly a more incremental or gradual approach to dealing with the problem of folks who may or may not be here legally and originally from Colombia. Certainly might have been more subtle, but I don't think any of us can be surprised. You know, President Trump doesn't really he doesn't really worry about the nuances as much, and he does what he thinks is best, and doesn't really worry about the political fallout or the public perception. And so I think that it's not surprising, but you know, certainly there probably was a more subtle or gradual approach to dealing with it. But that's not the president's style, and he's just making decisions based on what he thinks is best, and however the public perception plays out, well, that he'll deal with that at the time. That's kind of how he thinks about it in my eyes.
I see that. And do you think this could worsen inequality and humanitarian crisis?
Yeah, no, I think I don't think out globally. No, I think in the Western Hemisphere there certainly might be a significant effect in the fact, like Anders was saying, and like you were saying, Dr. Rubin, that if many of the folks who have been convicted or accused of crimes in the United States, and to the extent that they actually are guilty of those crimes and are getting sent back to specific countries in large numbers, well, yeah, that there will be a significant risk in those countries based on the type and scope of criminal activity that experienced in the United States. I don't see it having a strong effect on military affairs in other parts of the world, but in the Western Hemisphere there might be some isolated countries where the tenor and the dynamic that's experienced there might change from a safety perspective.
I see. Okay, I'll come back to you, Anders, and I would like to know what do you really think? What ways can President Trump's America First agenda, what ways can it really contribute to long-term global economic stability beyond something that just favors the United States? Do you get the question?
I mean that's an extremely big and complicated question. I mean the traditional let's call it neoliberal view would of course be that Trump is threatening the free trade system and stuff like that. It's a very as you know, it's a very ideologically driven view that free trade is always better, disregarding its costs. So what the world will just, again, I will use the term cultural shock here. The world will just have to get used to, at least for the coming 4 years, that there is an occupant of the White House that don't share this free trade is always better. As I understand it, Trump basically is a free trader, but he is not putting a blind eye to the costs, social and economic costs for many of the so-called free trade agreements the US has signed the last 20, 30, 40 years. So there will be, it will be a harsher tone. And you mentioned the Colombia incident the other day, with these two planes that they refused to give them permit to land. What Trump did, as I understand it, between hole 3 and 7 on the golf course, was to say, if you don't take back your criminal illegals, you will be met with 25% in tariffs and tolls. And the Colombian president just backed down within a couple of hours. And that's Trump. As was said here before, he is not a traditional politician who cares so much about image and optics and stuff like that. He's a thick-skinned businessman who wants to see results. And again, we will have to, the world will have to get used to this kind of not only doing business, but doing politics for the coming 4 years.
We'll have to get used to that. I think that's a very fine line. All right, let me come to you with this last question, Professor Rob. You see, America has actually been a nation of tariffs. I mean, the United States began its journey towards economic independence with a tariff of 1816. It was designed to shield American emerging industries from British combination. And that set the stage really for the protectionist policies that Donald Trump would revive 2 centuries later. And that's not the only one. During the Civil War, there was, of course, the Monroe Tariff of 1861 rather. And again, it became a lifeline for the Union, funding the war effort and fueling industrial growth. President Trump's tariff on steel and aluminum initially echoed the same strategy, aiming to protect America's critical industries during a time of intense global competition. So America has actually been, and we can go on and on, there have been several tariffs back in history that we can draw parallels with. So do you think that tariffs can really play a great role, as done in the past really, in strengthening America's economy and in strengthening America's economy, generally speaking? Let me get your thoughts on that, Professor.
Okay, so the impact of tariffs on the U.S. economy?
Yes, so I given the fact that the U.S. has been a country of tariffs, I mean, there have been several through history. I've talked about the tariff of 1816, and it did really protect America's industries from British competition. But also, it was also an opportunity for the US to say, look, America is a nation that is independent, and we're ready to defend that, not only politically, but economically as well. And then there are several other tariffs in history, the Monroe Tariff of 1861 and several others. So I'm saying America has actually been a nation of tariffs. It just seems that many are not aware of that. And what Trump is doing today looks very similar to what has been done in the past. So my question is, do you think that the current approach can really strengthen America's competitiveness, build the economy, make America very rich, like the president has always claimed? Or do you think that this time around it could be disastrous?
Okay, so what we were talking yesterday at a round table at the university that I work, and one of the ways that this could have a ripple effect on the U.S. economy is that there's been discussion about the fact that what the money that the government is able to generate in additional revenue from a tariff perspective might also affect the extent to which the government charges a personal income tax. So what I've heard is that they're toying with the idea of the fact that in exchange for the additional tax of the tariff that's getting passed on to the consumer, what President Trump and some of his colleagues are suggesting is that they will reduce the amount of income tax that individual Americans have to pay. So to the extent that people believe in the trickle-down theory and the idea that saving money at an individual level will lead to more investment, I think that may be a path.
As you know, not all tariffs lead to prosperity. The smooth holiday tariff, for example, of 1930 was aimed to protect American jobs during the Great Depression. But instead, it deepened global economic crisis. And there are some critics that say, look, Trump's tariffs, could lead to the same outcomes. And the warning of global wars, trade wars, and global instability. What are your thoughts? Do you think that it could be different this time, or you think it could have a positive effect, not only in America, but maybe also globally?
I think we must make a few things clear before we answer that question. You mentioned that the trade war that spun out of control in the beginning of the Great Depression and deepened it. And that proves that tolls and tariffs can be not only bad, but disastrous. On the other hand, if the system is stable, as was brought up before, what Trump and people around him are now considering is effectively to replace federal income tax with a permanent system of import tariffs. And if that's there, say that it's 10%, 5%, 50%, if that is put there at the same time as people get more money in their pocket to buy for, that compensates for the higher prices, I don't think it will have that much of effect globally. It may be a bad deal for low cost production countries like China and Vietnam until they catches up with salary and social costs and stuff like that. But as I said, as long as this is done relatively slowly and transparent, and there is you don't use tolls as desperate overnight measures to try to end an economic slump or something like happened in 1930 with that there. I think but as yet it must be done smartly and long term. Every player must know what's coming and what it will be. But as I said, in the end, if that's the case, I don't think it will have too much of an influence, no.
Oh, beautiful. Okay, now on a final note, if you have one advice to give to President Donald Trump, what would that be?
About tariffs or generally?
Generally, everything.
Oh, yeah, so suddenly I became a presidential advisor. I wasn't really prepared for that role. Maybe to stay focused, don't try to do everything. These first 2 weeks soon has been a flurry of everything from Ukraine to Colombia to immigration, and of course he has had 4 years to prepare. But as you go forward, Mr. President, focus on 2, 3, 4 important themes or issues, because no one can do everything, and some things are more important than others.
Dr. Edward Anders, W. Edwardson, also of Radical Betrayal, How Liberal and New Conservatives Are Wrecking American Exceptionalism, and Professor Rob Ginsburg's Professor of Strategy and Global Business Law at the Harvard Business School in the USA. Thank you so much for coming on the program, and thank you to all our viewers from around the world. Thank you for joining us.